cocktail menu didn't have prices. That was the first thing my brother noticed, and the last thing he should have said out loud. "No prices," he announced to the table, holding the leather-bound menu like evidence in a trial. He looked at me with the grin he always used when he was about to be generous in a way that reminded everyone he could afford to be. "Don't worry about it, Kira. Tonight's on me. Order whatever you want. Even the water here is probably $40, he laughed. The table laughed with him, because that's what the Gallagher family did when Patrick made a joke about money. They laughed, and I absorbed it, and the evening continued on its predetermined track. My name is Kira Walsh. I'm 30 years old, and I was sitting at a rooftop bar 62 stories above Manhattan on a Friday evening in October, surrounded by 17 family members who were all performing varying degrees of the same assumption, that I couldn't afford to be here. The rooftop bar was called Vertex. It occupied the top 2 floors of a residential tower in Hudson Yards that had been written about in every architecture and design publication in the country. The views were absurd. The Manhattan skyline stretched in every direction. The bridges lit up like jewelry laid across dark water. The city pulsing beneath us with the energy of 8 million lives happening simultaneously. The cocktails were handcrafted by a mixologist who'd been recruited from Tokyo. The small plates were prepared by a chef who'd left a 2 Michelin star restaurant in Copenhagen because he wanted creative freedom. The music was curated by a DJ who only played vinyl and charged $5,000 per evening for the privilege. Everything about Vertex was designed to feel exclusive, intimate, and impossibly expensive. My brother Patrick had chosen it for our father's 65th birthday dinner, specifically because it was the kind of place that allowed him to demonstrate his financial position. Patrick was a managing director at a commercial real estate firm. He made $1.8 million a year. He wore watches that cost more than cars and drove cars that cost more than apartments. His wife, Sloane, matched his energy in Bottega Veneta and quiet disdain for anyone who earned less than 7 figures. Together, they were the family's power couple, the ones who picked the restaurants, booked the vacations, and decided who deserved to be included in things. My older sister, Margot, was a dermatologist with a successful practice in the West Village. She contributed to the family dynamic by being perpetually, vocally concerned about everyone else's skin and financial health, in that order. My parents, Frank and Diane Gallagher, occupied the center of the table with the comfortable certainty of people who'd raised one overachiever, one successful professional, and one puzzle they'd stopped trying to solve. The puzzle was me. As far as my family understood, I worked in property management, a vague, unglamorous job that I described with intentional blandness whenever asked. I managed buildings, small ones, in Brooklyn. Nothing exciting. Nothing worth discussing over handcrafted cocktails 62 stories above the city. What my family didn't know was that I didn't just manage buildings. I owned them. Specifically, I owned the building we were currently sitting on top of, and 23 others. Walsh Properties was a real estate development and investment firm I'd built over the past 9 years from a single distressed brownstone in Bed-Stuy into a portfolio of 24 residential and mixed-use buildings across Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens, totaling 4,800 units, generating $410 million in annual revenue, with a total portfolio valuation of $3.6 billion. The tower beneath our feet, the one that housed Vertex and 340 luxury residential units, was my flagship development. I'd acquired the land, secured the financing, hired the architects, approved every design decision, and personally selected the rooftop bar concept that Patrick was currently using to showcase his own wealth. The penthouse apartment 3 floors above where we sat, the one with the private terrace and the panoramic views that had been featured on the cover of Architectural Digest, was my home. I lived there, 65 floors above the city, in a building I'd built, above a bar my brother had chosen to impress the family, wearing a simple black dress and flats that made everyone assume I'd scraped together enough for a cab to get here. The irony was so complete, it had its own gravitational field. Patrick was ordering for the table. He did this at every family gathering, not because anyone asked him to, but because ordering for others was a power move dressed as generosity. "We'll start with the Wagyu tartare," he told the server, "the hamachi crudo, 2 orders of the truffle arancini, and a bottle of the Krug." He turned to me. "Kira, do you want something simpler? They probably have a house wine or something more." He paused. "Accessible." The word accessible did exactly what he intended it to do. It drew a line between his world and mine, between the people who ordered Krug and the people who needed a more affordable option pointed out to them by their successful brother. "I'm fine with water," I said. He nodded with the satisfied expression of a man whose assumptions had been confirmed. Sloane whispered something to Margot that I couldn't hear, but could guess from their shared glance in my direction. Probably something about my dress, or my shoes, or the general state of being Kira at a place like this. My phone buzzed in my clutch. My chief operating officer, Rafael Vega, who ran Walsh Properties' day-to-day operations from our offices on the 42nd floor of this very building. "Building manager wants to know if you want the penthouse prepped for after dinner. Also, Dimitri from the bar is asking if he should send up your usual." I typed back, "Tell the manager yes. Tell Dimitri not yet. I'll let it happen naturally." He replied, "Your family is drinking Krug in your building and they think you can't afford the water." This is the most expensive comedy show in Manhattan. I put my phone away and ate a piece of bread. The bread was excellent. It should have been. I tasted 14 versions before approving the final recipe for the bar's menu. The story of Walsh Properties begins with a condemned building and a calculator. At 21, after dropping out of NYU's real estate program because I'd learned more from watching actual transactions than from textbooks, I used $38,000 in savings from 3 years of working as an assistant at a property management company to buy a condemned brownstone in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. The building had been gutted by a fire 2 years earlier. The previous owner had walked away. The city was preparing to seize it. I bought it at auction for $38,000 because nobody else wanted a burned-out shell in a neighborhood that most investors had written off. I spent 11 months renovating it, not with contractors, with my own hands, a library card for home repair books, and a relentless stubbornness that my family mistook for directionlessness. I rewired the electrical system from YouTube tutorials. I learned plumbing from a retired contractor who lived next door and worked for pizza and beer. I refinished the floors on my hands and knees with a rented sander that weighed more than I did. When I was done, I had a 4-unit brownstone that I rented for a combined $8,200 per month. My mortgage payments was $1,400. At 22, I was generating $6,800 per month in positive cash flow from a building the city had been ready to demolish. That brownstone was the seed. Within 2 years, I'd acquired 6 more distressed properties using the cash flow and refinanced equity. Within 4 years, I had 38 units. Within 6, I'd crossed 500 units and formed Walsh Properties as a proper development company. I hired Raphael, a Columbia MBA with 10 years of experience at one of the largest real estate private equity firms in the country. He thought I was reckless. Then he saw my spreadsheets and realized I was the opposite. I was pathologically precise. The growth from 500 units to 4,800 happened in 3 years. I'd moved from renovation into ground-up development, building residential towers from dirt to skyline. The building beneath us was my masterwork, a 65-story mixed-use tower that I developed from concept to completion in 34 months, on budget, ahead of schedule, and fully leased within 9 months of opening. The penthouse, my penthouse, had been appraised at $42 million. I'd built it to my exact specifications. Every room, every material, every view line calculated to frame the city in the way I loved most. And I lived there in complete anonymity, because Walsh Properties' public filings listed the founder as K. Walsh, and nobody in the real estate press had ever connected that initial to the quiet woman in the black dress whose family thought she managed small buildings in Brooklyn. Patrick was telling our father about a development project his firm was pursuing in Midtown. "The numbers are strong," he said, his confidence filling the rooftop like cologne. "We're projecting 22% returns over 5 years. Very solid deal." I thought about the 340% return my Hudson Yards tower had generated in 3 years. Very solid indeed. My father nodded approvingly. He'd spent his career as a mid-level bank officer. His understanding of real estate was limited to his own mortgage, but he trusted Patrick's expertise with the unquestioning faith of a father whose son wore expensive watches and used words like cap rate at dinner. "Kira," Margot said, turning to me with the concerned expression she used when she was about to be condescending, "how's the property management going? Are you still doing that?" "Still doing it," I said. She nodded. "It's honest work. Someone has to manage those buildings." I managed 24 of them, I thought. I also built them, own them, and collect $410 million a year from the people who live in them. But sure, honest work. 8:47 p.m. The sun had fully set. The city was performing its nightly transformation from daylight functionality to electric spectacle. The rooftop bar glowed with candlelight and the amber warmth of carefully designed lighting that I'd spent 3 weeks selecting with the architectural team. My phone buzzed. Raphael. "Victor Marchetti is coming up. He wants to check on the new sound system installation in the private dining room. He'll enter through the penthouse elevator. He doesn't know you're at the bar." Victor Marchetti was the building's general manager, a former luxury hotel executive I'd hired away from the Four Seasons. He managed the residential operations, the commercial tenants, and the rooftop bar with the meticulous attention of a man who understood that a building is a living system, not just a structure. Victor also knew exactly who I was. He reported to me weekly. He'd stood in my penthouse living room dozens of times, reviewing operational reports. And he called me Ms. Walsh, with a specific deference reserved for the person whose name was on the building. I typed back to Raphael, "Let him come. Don't warn him." Raphael, "You know Victor, he's going to make a scene." I know, that's the point. 8:52 p.m. The private elevator doors opened at the far end of the rooftop. Victor emerged in his signature dark suit, tablet in hand, walking with the focused purpose of a man checking on his building. He crossed the rooftop toward the private dining room, his path taking him directly past our table. Patrick noticed him. He always noticed men in expensive suits. He straightened his posture, the instinctive response of a man who wanted to be seen as an equal by other men who looked successful. Victor was 3 steps past our table when he glanced to his left and saw me. He stopped, the way a car stops when the light turns red, completely, immediately, without negotiation. "Miss Walsh?" he said, and his voice carried the genuine surprise and instant respect of a man encountering his boss in an unexpected setting. "I didn't know you were dining with us tonight. Is everything to your satisfaction? Should I have the kitchen prepare your usual?" He stepped closer to the table, his posture shifting to the slightly forward lean of someone addressing the most important person in the room. And I wanted to mention, the Penthouse terrace heating system has been serviced. It's ready whenever you'd like to head up. The table didn't freeze gradually. It seized. Like a machine that's had a wrench thrown into its gears. Every fork stopped. Every glass paused. Every conversation died mid-syllable. Patrick's Krug was suspended at an angle that defied physics. Sloane's whispered commentary to Margot ended on an open vowel. My father's birthday smile became something more complex. My mother's hand tightened around her napkin. "Miss Walsh," Patrick repeated. He said it the way you say a word in a language you don't speak, slowly, testing each sound for meaning. Penthouse. Victor, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure but not fully understanding its source, continued with the earnest professionalism that made him excellent at his job. "Of course, your family is always welcome here, Ms. Walsh. Would you like me to arrange the private dining room for the rest of the evening? It has the better view of the bridge, as you know. Your terrace view is still the best in the building, of course." He smiled. "But you designed it that way." "I designed it that way." 6 words that landed on the table like a detonation sequence. Patrick set down his champagne. The crystal touched the table with a sound that seemed to carry the weight of 9 years of assumptions. "You designed what?" he said. His voice had lost its performance polish. It was raw now, bare. "This building," I said. "I developed it. I own it. The tower, the residences, the commercial space, the bar we're sitting in right now. Walsh Properties. K. Walsh. Kira Walsh." Victor's eyes moved between me and my family, the realization dawning on his face that he'd walked into something much larger than a sound system check. He took a professional step backward. "Perhaps I should come back later, Ms. Walsh." "Stay, Victor," I said, then to the table. "Victor is the general manager of this building. He reports to me, because I own the building, along with 23 others across the city. 4,800 residential units total, $410 million in annual revenue, portfolio valued at $3.6 billion. Patrick's face went through more stages than the elevator he'd ridden to get here. Shock, computation, denial,
recomputation, acceptance, and then a final expression I'd never seen on his face before, one that mixed admiration with the specific pain of realizing you've been spectacularly, embarrassingly wrong about someone for their entire adult life. "You live here," Sloane said. Her voice was small. "The Penthouse," I confirmed. 65th floor, private terrace. The one Architectural Digest featured on their cover. She'd had that issue on her coffee table for 4 months. "The Penthouse," she whispered, turning to Patrick. "The one you showed me online. The one you said was the most impressive residential space in the city." She looked at me. "That's your apartment." "That's my apartment," I confirmed. "The one I designed. In the building I developed. Above the bar where my brother just offered to buy me a glass of house wine because he assumed I couldn't afford the cocktails." The silence that followed had texture. You could feel it pressing against your skin, filling the space between the candles and the skyline, settling over the table like something heavy and permanent. Margot spoke first. "Honest work," she said, quoting herself from 10 minutes ago. Her face was the color of the cranberry garnish in her abandoned cocktail. "Someone has to manage those buildings. That's what I said to the woman who owns 24 of them." My mother was crying, not dramatically, the quiet kind, the tears that come when you realize you've spent 30 years looking at a picture and seeing it wrong. My father hadn't spoken. He was looking at the city below us, the buildings and bridges and streets that his daughter's company helped shape. He was recalculating something that had nothing to do with numbers. Patrick stood up. He walked around the table, past Victor, past the abandoned Krug, past 9 years of wrong assumptions. He stopped in front of me. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just looked at me. Really looked. Maybe for the first time since we were children. "I ordered you house wine," he said, "in your own building." "You did," I confirmed. "In my own bar, served by my own staff, from a menu I approved." He sat down in the empty chair next to me, not his power seat at the head of the table. The chair beside me, the one nobody had claimed because sitting next to Kira wasn't a priority. "It is now," his posture said. "Tell me everything," he said quietly. "Not the numbers, the buildings. Tell me how you built them." So I did. I told him about the condemned brownstone in Bed-Stuy, the YouTube electrical tutorials, the retired plumber who worked for pizza, the 11 months of sawdust and determination, the $38,000 that became $3.6 billion through 9 years of work that nobody in this family had bothered to ask about. I told him about the tower beneath our feet, the 34 months from dirt to skyline, the 340 luxury units that were fully leased in 9 months, the penthouse I designed to frame the city in the way I loved most, with sightlines to every bridge and a terrace that caught the sunrise over Brooklyn and the sunset over New Jersey. I told him about the 23 other buildings, the thousands of tenants, the families who lived in spaces I'd created, the jobs generated, the neighborhoods improved, the city reshaped one block at a time by a woman whose family thought she managed small buildings in Brooklyn. He listened. For the first time in our adult lives, my brother listened to me without interrupting, without redirecting, without performing. Just listened. Victor had quietly arranged for the private dining room to be opened.
The rest of the evening continued there, away from the other bar guests, in a room with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the Brooklyn Bridge like a painting. My mother held my hand through dessert and didn't let go. My father asked questions about load-bearing walls and zoning regulations with the genuine curiosity of a man discovering a new world at 65. Margot apologized for the honest work comment 3 separate times. I told her twice was sufficient. She apologized a 4th time anyway. Sloane was quiet for most of the evening. Then, as we were leaving, she pulled me aside. "The penthouse," she said. "Can I see it?" "Not tonight," I said, "but come for breakfast Sunday. I'll make coffee on the terrace." She nodded. "It's the most beautiful home I've ever seen in a magazine." "It's better in person," I said. "I designed it that way." After the family left, I took the private elevator up 3 floors to my apartment. The penthouse was quiet. The city glowed through the windows I'd positioned to catch maximum light at every hour. The terrace door was open, letting in the October air that carried the faint sound of traffic 65 floors below. Raphael called. "How did it go?" "They know," I said, "finally." He paused. "How do you feel?" I walked onto the terrace, my terrace, above my building, above my bar, above the table where my brother had ordered me house wine in a kingdom I'd built with my own hands. "I feel home," I said. The word had never meant more. The months that followed were the quietest transformation in the Gallagher family's history. The news spread through the extended family within days, not because I told anyone, because Patrick did. He called every aunt, uncle, and cousin individually, not to brag on my behalf, to confess on his own. He told each of them the same thing. I ordered my sister house wine in her own building. I told her she couldn't afford cocktails in a bar she owns. And I've been doing versions of that for 9 years. He said it was the most humbling phone call series of his life. 3 cousins cried. 2 aunts sent me flowers. Uncle Raymond, who'd spent 20 years in construction, drove to the city specifically to stand in the lobby of my Hudson Yards tower and stare at the ceiling for 40 minutes. He called me afterward. "I've built things my whole life," he said. "I've never built anything like this. Nobody in this family has. Nobody in this family knew." The real estate industry took notice when the family connection became public. A profile in The Real Deal traced Kay Walsh to Kira Walsh to the Gallagher family dinner at Vertex. The headline read, "The $3.6 billion developer who built the city's most exclusive tower while her family thought she managed rentals in Brooklyn." Patrick framed the article. He hung it in his office at the commercial real estate firm, directly across from his own deal tombstones. When his colleagues asked about it, he told them the truth. "My sister is better at this than I am. She built from nothing. I built from privilege. The numbers aren't even close." Sloane came for breakfast that Sunday. She stood on the terrace for 20 minutes without speaking, watching the sunrise paint the East River in shades of copper and pink. When she finally said something, it was the most honest sentence I'd ever heard from her. "I spent my whole marriage trying to live in the most impressive space in the city." She turned to me. "You built it, and you never mentioned it once." I poured her coffee, the good kind, from the machine I'd picked because it made the penthouse smell like mornings are supposed to smell. Patrick stopped choosing restaurants to prove things. He started asking me about development projects with the sincere interest of a man who'd realized his sister knew more about real estate than anyone he'd ever worked with. He visited 3 of my buildings. He walked through lobbies and hallways and rooftop gardens, touching surfaces and reading tenant reviews and asking how I'd made decisions that his own firm struggled with daily. His firm approached Walsh Properties about a joint venture 6 months later. I considered it on its merits, not on family obligation. The numbers worked. We partnered on a 22-story mixed-use development in Long Island City that broke ground the following spring. Margot started volunteering at a community health clinic I funded in one of my Brooklyn buildings. She did free skin consultations for tenants who couldn't afford dermatology appointments. She told me it was the most fulfilling work she'd done in years. My mother came to the Penthouse every Sunday morning. She sat on the terrace with coffee and watched the city wake up. She never said much during those mornings. She just sat there, in a space her daughter had built, watching a view her daughter had designed, absorbing the reality that the child she'd worried about most had built the highest home in the family. My father wrote me a letter, handwritten, on the stationery my mother had given him for his 65th birthday. It was short, 3 sentences. It said, "I spent my whole career in a bank, helping other people build things. My daughter builds the things. I should have looked up sooner." I framed it. It hangs in my penthouse office next to the original deed for the condemned brownstone in Bed-Stuy, the $38,000 building that started everything. The building nobody wanted, bought by the woman nobody watched in a neighborhood nobody believed in. 3 things that turned out to be worth $3.6 billion when someone with vision and patience decided they mattered. On my father's 66th birthday, Patrick suggested the Rooftop bar again. Same venue, same table, same skyline. But this time, when the cocktail menu arrived, he handed it to me. "You order," he said. "It's your bar." I ordered the Krug for the whole table, and when the server asked if there was anything else, Victor appeared from the private elevator with his usual timing and his usual professionalism and said the words that made my mother cry for the 2nd time on this rooftop. "Ms. Walsh, your terrace is ready whenever the family would like to move upstairs." My father raised his glass. "To the penthouse," he said. "To our daughter's penthouse." Everyone drank. And I looked out at the city I'd helped build, the bridges and towers and streets that stretched in every direction. And I thought about the woman who'd stood on a different rooftop 9 years ago, on a burned-out brownstone in Brooklyn, staring at this same skyline from 65 floors closer to the ground, and promising herself she'd get here. She did. Not because anyone believed she would, not because her family invested in her or encouraged her or even asked what she was building, but because sometimes the most powerful foundation isn't money or connections or a brother who orders champagne to prove he can. It's a condemned building, a library card, and the absolute refusal to let the people who underestimate you determine how high you're allowed to build. Sometimes the woman who can't afford the drinks is the woman who owns the bar. Sometimes the house wine is served in a building she built. And sometimes the best view in the city belongs to the person nobody thought was worth looking at.